every year there's people in the class, if you looked at their numbers or just at the numbers, you'd be like, you got in? But then you get to speak to them, or you understand and you see the things that they're sharing in the application. You're like, oh yeah, this is a no-brainer. You would be amazing at any of our schools, and we're actually really lucky to have you. Class profiles, what a past class has done, or that outcome that shows up on the class profile, has no bearing on how I'm assessing you as an individual.
Your test score is not your destiny in the admissions process.
I will never admit or deny someone solely because of their essays. Don't write for us. Don't write for me. Don't write for Stanford. Write for you.
There's very little relationship between people's confidence in their ability to get into a place and their ability to get into a place.
So I think one of the optimistic takeaways that applicants can get from this is it doesn't matter where you've been or what challenges you face. The GSBs and business schools in general, when they're looking at these things holistically, you don't need to despair and think like there is a mold and I need to fit that mold. And if I don't fit that mold, forget it.
When it comes to MBA applications, what truly matters most? Is it the GMAT? Is it your GPA, personal statement, or something else entirely? Welcome to episode 3 of the GMAT Club Podcast. I'm Brian Fobi, founder of GuruFi.com, and my co-host, Maria Wich-Vila, founder of Applicant Lab. And today, our guest is Will Torres, Global Admissions Director, new title for you, at Stanford GSB. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be able to join y'all. Been watching your other episode and seemed like a lot of fun. So thank you.
So Will, thank you so much for joining us. As I'm sure you know, in your work with prospective applicants to Stanford, there are so many elements that go into someone's background when they're applying. And a lot of applicants don't know how important are some of these different elements. Is it my work experience? Is it my goals? Is it my essay? Is it my test scores? And so I think today what we're going to do is we're going to cover some of these big buckets of someone's background and try to get sort of the AdCom perspective from you on what role some of these different pieces play. So I think I'm going to start with the role or the importance of that pre-MBA employer. And specifically, I think, how important is it that I've worked for some globally recognized firm, say one of the fancy MBB consulting firms, or one of the FAANG tech companies, or an elite private equity shop. How important is that? Is that a requirement to get into a top business school? And if people don't have that, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I'll start with this specific answer, and then I might zoom out a little bit. And so for us at Stanford specifically, it does not matter that you have worked for a quote unquote major firm. You do not need to have had international experience. We know that everybody has a different path. And so to zoom out, we practice the holistic review process. So our application is really long, so I'm just going to start there. But it helps us really understand like who you are, where you came from, what are some of the resources and contexts and circumstances that you've navigated to where you are today. And so for us, it's less about kind of how flashy something looks, and it's more about, okay, what have you done and how? Like it's these actions and behaviors, and those are going to be some of the most kind of interesting things to myself as we're reading your application, no matter where it's happening. Big firm, small firm, maybe you're part of a faith-based community, maybe it's a club or organization, maybe it's things you're doing at home as well. There's lots of different ways to demonstrate some of those like action-based leadership behaviors.
That's fantastic. So within sort of, let's start with the people who do work in those bigger firms, like they're one of several hundred McKinsey consultants or Deloitte consultants, or one of those huge buckets of candidates that you get. When you are looking at their backgrounds, do you associate people who work at a fancier firm with, do you have an expectation for a certain level of responsibility? Or maybe a better question is like, because so many of them have similar levels of responsibility, how can they sort of stand out against each other when you take, if you've got a number of candidates who have the similar blue chip experience, what are some examples, or how do people differentiate between each other?
Yeah, maybe a way to approach this is don't worry about the other people. There's no need to quote unquote differentiate yourself and try to compare yourself against anybody else. because the way that, so Maria, the things that you do to make yourself effective and impactful are going to look very different from the things that Brian does. And it's going to look very different from the things that I do, even though we might all be in the same kind of world, and the perspectives and those actions are going to be different. So rather than trying to pitch or position yourself relative to others, like think about what have you done, how. I often start it with, what are 2 or 3 things that you're proud of? What did you do to make that happen? Then what happened? What was possible because of that? And being able to then kind of lean into the things that you do. That's the way for us. We're focusing that way versus here's a bucket. How do you compare within that bucket? Okay, that's context. The things that somebody as a consultant might do to demonstrate impact, right? There are things that you might do at a McKinsey that are going to look very different from a boutique firm. And so, right, and so this is all context to help me understand your journey, rather than trying to pit you against other folks who superficially might be similar, but 2 or 3 questions in, you're very different individuals. And those are some of the things that we really want to honor, that you are you.
That's terrific to hear. And one thing that I frequently tell applicants is that, Stanford in particular, but a lot of the top schools are looking for people who move mountains, but the size of the mountain and the shape of the mountain and the contours of the mountain are going to be different based on where you live, so to speak, where you live professionally, right? So if you're at a McKinsey, the mountains that you're moving might look pretty different than if you're working at, say, a school-based after-school program, right? So whatever that is, they're looking for people who move mountains, who jump into their environments and make a difference, but they are cognizant of the fact that the mountains that they're moving are going to look really, really different.
Yeah, there's this concept of like positionality, right? Where you are in the world matters, kind of, and I say the world as a broad categorization of, or just like an umbrella term for, yes, it could be literally where in the world you are, but even like power dynamics in the organizations that you're part of, the things that you might be doing earlier in your career, right? Might look very different from the things that folks who are later in their careers are doing. But again, I'm not pitting you against each other or expecting you to have the same level of opportunity as anybody else. So really trying to center you in this process and understand kind of your positionality and the spaces that you're in and what resources were available, how have you been able to leave footprints behind? Again, all of that is, I can only learn that if you're able to share some of those details with me. And again, acknowledge that the GSB application is very long, but it's really valuable because it helps me understand kind of the context of your world with so much more depth and nuance. So thank you for everything you do to invest yourselves and pour yourselves into the applications. We really do care. And it's such an honor, like when you share these things with us.
So I think one of the optimistic takeaways that applicants can get from this is it doesn't matter where you've been or what challenges you face. The GSB's application and business schools in general, when they're looking at these things holistically, you don't need to despair and think like there is a mold and I need to fit that mold. And if I don't fit that mold, forget it. They really are looking at the context in which you are working and in which you live and what sort of difference are you making within that context. And so I think this is terrific news for everyone in the applicant pool. So thank you.
Yeah. Context matters. And you're 1,000% right. There's no archetype. There's no mold that you have to feel like you have to fit. Just speak your truth. And like, that's some of the most exciting stuff. Like think about when you've had conversations with people and like there was this connection and you see them light up. I think about how do you find that energy in the application process, follow the joy, follow the energy, and that'll make kind of getting your thoughts onto paper and communicating the you that much easier.
One of the challenges that I will sometimes have when I'm working with applicants is this barrier to authenticity where whether it's because people, how they use forums or other people who have been admitted, they feel like there's a pattern that they need to follow. So I remember, maybe a dozen years ago, almost irrespective of what people's actual experience was, they wanted to write about their interest in being a quant, right? That was like, everyone has to be a quant. And then it was like, whatever, every couple of years, it's a new thing. So I imagine that, everything is going to be AI related the next couple of years for some schools. And so you'll have to kind of talk to people about, don't try to guess trends, but at the same time, you are dealing with people in many of their careers where information and assessing information is such a big part of what they do that it's hard to tell people, look, don't care about trends. So can you say something about how either maybe your approach to the class composition or what you're looking for changes or doesn't change from year to year? And maybe someone who feels like they need to try to force their background into a mold that they feel like Stanford is looking for. What advice would you give to that type of applicant?
Yeah, so maybe it's even like unpacking that word authentic, because I think it's such a charged word these days, especially in the admissions process. I think at its simplest, it's just like, who are you? Like, what do you care about? Kind of speaking your truth, for kind of lack of more articulate phrasing. And if it is, maybe you really are kind of in love with the world of AI and fascinated by it, kind of why for you? What about it speaks to you, right? So as you get to some of these next layers beneath of like how, why, and always centering the individual and who you are in that, I think that's the way to go here, and not feel like you're catching a wave just to catch the wave, but you're catching it because it's something it's maybe a hypothesis or two hypotheses that you want to test out for you. And again, being able to speak clearly about like the individual interest in that, not just for the application process, but honestly, once you're on campus, that's kind of the focus and one of the philosophies for how the Career Management Center supports you, or kind of referencing back to that conversation with people, and then your eyes sparkle because it's something you care about. Oh, I know somebody, let me connect you with them. Or, hey, you should really check out this class. I think you'd love it. It seems like you have a lot of energy there. Or, hey, you should go take that class like across campus. It's like a 5-minute walk from here. Like, go take it with, that's the person who like developed that field, right? And so being able to, again, lean on the things that you care about will help facilitate not just your time on campus, but open career opportunities and things beyond. So I like to think about the application process as part of an exercise in that, kind of nudging you there, which is hard to always embrace the process and some of the, and how it prepares you for business school when, you're doing it for an outcome, right? But I really do think there's value in engaging with the questions in the spirit that they're being asked.
I think that's, it's at the heart of what I try to do. And it's probably the most consistently difficult thing to convey, which is people really want to go to Stanford. It's a great school. And so the question that they ask is actually non-intuitively, it's kind of the wrong question. Like they ask, like, how do I get into Stanford? Right. Or, and they have an archetype or like a vision in their mind of what a Stanford student is. And then, they're saying, how do I turn Brian into that? Right. And that can be a little bit tricky. It was let's take a step back and let's figure out who Brian is. Right. And then from there, there's a lot of different versions of every person, many of which can be true. Right. I am a different person as a dad than as a business owner, than as a son, than as a husband, et cetera. And so you have to find authenticity there. But it's also that point that you make about its outcome related is so charged, because it really is just about like, how do I get from A to B? And, within ethical guidelines, most people are like, I just need to get there. Right. And one of the things that I'm curious about, because I think it informs how applicants in particular right now, like in the calendar year, are approaching this application season, thinking about, August, September and beyond. And they're starting to think about their position as applicants. They're starting to think about their strategy. And so in a weird way, I like to think of it at the very kind of end of the process when you guys have their application. So I don't know if it's still, an actual literal manila folder like in the olden days, but you have the folder or the PDF in front of you and you're looking at Brian or Maria's application. Where's the first place that your eyes go, and what's the first thing that you want to know or that you're trying to find out? Do you start with the basics of scores? Do you look at the personal statement, or is it just, I'm not going to make any determination until I get all of the information and then I start to think about it?
The latter one. So I'm reading the entire thing before making an assessment, because you never know where you're going to find these details that help kind of bring more nuance. So coming back to why I'm such a believer in the holistic the review process, I'm going to use quant as the example because that's where I think a lot of people's anxieties are. So maybe testing your quant score isn't something that you're super happy with. We have no minimums, there's no benchmarks, no quotas. But I know sometimes people are like, oh, that's a number. Okay, well, not everybody shines in a testing environment, or maybe you weren't able to get the accommodations you need to do your best work. I'll look at your transcripts. What classes have you taken? Okay, maybe it's actually in your work where you're doing a lot of data analysis, or maybe you had like a CFO role in an organization, or maybe there's something in your letters of recommendation where they're talking about, hey, here's how they were able to use data, like some of these skills, right? And so, okay, maybe it's these different pieces. That's how I'm getting to understand and develop some of that confidence that you're going to be able to thrive in the classroom beyond just the, okay, checkbox, checkbox, checkbox type of like situation. So again, really pouring myself and ourselves into the evaluation process, hopefully the same way that y'all are. And I know y'all are pouring yourselves into the application itself. So, want to make sure that we're honoring the effort and kind of vulnerability that you're providing by giving you as kind of open, honest, and kind of equitable kind of assessment as possible.
So speaking then of the test scores, because as you touched upon and as you well know, this is a source of significant anxiety. So when you guys are looking at someone's GMAT or GRE test score, how do you balance that compared to, say, their professional accomplishments? So for example, can a very, very strong test performance make up for a lack of professional accomplishments, maybe for a younger candidate, for example, or conversely, can very, very strong work experience, like really moving those mountains, so to speak, can that make up for perhaps a lower performance on the test?
So there's no formula and there's no weighing per se, and there's no balancing in the way that we think people might think about in terms of kind of rubrics. Like, it's all context, and these are different dimensions of who you are. And again, because there are so many different pieces that I'm able to learn about you through the process, it wouldn't be fair to assign weights, because I mean, every year there's people in the class. If you looked at their numbers or just at the numbers, you'd be like, you got in. But then you get to speak to them, or you understand and you see the things that they're sharing in the application. You're like, oh yeah, this is a no-brainer. You would be amazing at any of our schools, and we're actually really lucky to have you, right? And so, and it's hard to get beyond that, especially when you see a kind of a limited data set, or you see a class profile and that there's a number there and that feels like you have to anchor to it. Class profiles, what a past class has done, or that outcome that shows up on the class profile, has no bearing on how I'm assessing you as an individual, right? Because your life is different, your path to Stanford is different. And so we want to honor that as well. So maybe not a super satisfying answer to your question, Maria, but I think it's a lot closer to the truth for us. It's everybody's different. And again, we want to honor that.
Yeah, and I think the important takeaway here for people who are listening is that, as with the blue chip career path so far, your test score is not your destiny in the admissions process. It's just one piece. And the average score is made up of hundreds of individual scores that really run a huge spectrum. I once worked with someone, one of my favorite stories was I worked with a candidate whose test scores were pretty significantly below the Stanford average. And they went to work with other admissions consultants, and all the other admissions consultants turned him away. Or they said, well, we'll work with you, but only for like schools that are easier to get into, but we're not going to work with you for Stanford. But as you said, if you only look at the test score, you'd be like, never mind. But then when you talk to this person and you read about the accomplishments that they had and the people that they helped, and I was like, you should totally apply to Stanford. I actually had to talk him into it because I'm like, you are the sort of person Stanford is looking for. And he got in, and it was great. So it really is a testament. So anyone who's listening who might doubt the sincerity with which Will is saying this, I can personally vouch for the fact that the Stanford admissions office absolutely does take a holistic view. And, that test score is just one piece of it. But wow, if you've really, their motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. If you've started to change the world, what's a test score in comparison to really impacting thousands of lives in a positive way? Hopefully that's a relief for some of you who might be listening. Could you talk a little bit more about how maybe someone who hasn't had that world-changing impact has really been able to be effective in the process, even if the scope of their impact has been a little bit more individualized?
Yeah, I mean, it's that notion like scope, scale, those are kind of less relevant in the context of the GSB application, more of like, what have you done? What are the actions? Because, those are things that are then you'll be able to either repeat or turn into superpowers. And those are some of the things that will make you effective later on, such that when you are in those roles and positions, you can then kind of affect the change that is consistent with who you are as an individual, your values, your goals, and the organizational goals. So I think there's a lot of like positive ripple effect from there. But it starts with you. I think that's it's like centerpiece phrase of our information session, but the more that I have been and the longer I've been a part of the GSB community, the more and more real it feels that it does start with you, right? And I don't know, this maybe Maria, Brian, a question for you is how much like affirmation like do you find yourself doing in this work? Where people are always like, I'm not enough, when in reality, no, you are enough and you're incredible. And like, how do we help you hold that in a way that feels true to who you are while still, moving through the world that way?
Well, I can tell you that there's very little relationship between people's confidence in their ability to get into a place and their ability to get into a place. The people who've been extraordinary, that like are no-brainers, like, why are you even here? You don't need much help. You're going to get wherever you're going to go. They're often the ones that are like, they need to be talked out of only applying to West Jesus Tech. You're like, look, this is madness. You have to aim higher. And part of this also has some personal resonance to me because I remember my own academic advisor. I had to be talked into applying to Yale. My wife had to be talked into applying to Harvard Medical School. And, like imposter syndrome or whatever it is a real thing. And a lot of times, and I don't want to make your life harder by having 10,000 more people apply to Stanford GSB, but I think there's certainly a lot of people who should aim higher. And one of the things that admissions work has made clear to me is the degree to which people don't really know themselves, because whatever your life is just what's normal. And so I can tell you stories, amazing stories about, I remember it was 4 or 5 years ago, there was someone who was applying to business schools. And, at the very end of the consultation, minute 55 of the hour-long consultation, and he seemed like a perfectly nice guy. And he'd had, it was like, okay, there's stuff that we can work with. And he offhandedly mentioned the hospital that he built during the Libyan civil war. And I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? Like, that is the most extraordinary thing I've heard all year. And it's like, oh, it wasn't really anything. And it turned out that what he had done is he had negotiated with both sides to basically not get attacked at this clinic he built. He did not have medical training. He used YouTube videos, right? And I was like, why is this not everything in your application? Like, this is amazing. And he was like, well, it's something I did. And he wanted to write about how he was interested in using analytics, blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, awesome. We're not talking about that anymore. Like, we're talking about this thing. And that's an extreme example of something that I've seen a lot, which is that sometimes you need someone else to let you know that you can, because it would never occur to you that you're extraordinary because you just live your life and whatever you are is what you are. And you're just, hey, I'm just Mike, right? Like, I'm not.
Folks who work 2 or 3 jobs while in college and not only we're putting themselves through, but maybe we're supporting others or still being a rock for their community and performing well in school. Like, that's great. Let me know about that. Those are all things that you're doing, right? And so to your point, right? Yeah, some things might feel big to others, but for you, it's your everyday. And hopefully folks start to feel comfortable with sharing their everyday, because your everyday is like the most interesting thing to me. Cool things and things that you're proud of are often the accumulation of lots of small actions and not just the one big hurrah. It could be there, but maybe it's just a accumulation of like incredible everydays as well. And that's great as well.
Yeah, I think similar to Brian, and I think this is a lot of us who end up working in the admissions ecosystem and supporting applicants in no matter how we end up doing it. A lot of us have those stories, right? When I was applying, I was applying to Princeton as in high school, And one of the people in my high school pulled me aside and they were like, look, Maria, colleges like that don't take kids from schools like this. So like that was literally, that's seared in my memory for my whole life, was colleges like that don't take kids from school. I was attending a large public high school in Baltimore. And, but I was like, but I'm going to try. And I think that spark, I think, we, Brian and I, and anyone who does this work, and even you guys on the admissions side, like we carry that with us. We want to find those people who are like, I'm not going to let you tell me what I can't do. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep over, people are, the bombing of the clinic is that's a pretty amazing example, but even in smaller ways. So I think, I will say that I find that the people who are more humble about there's sometimes, not always, is an inverse relationship between how humble someone is and how amazing they are. I do find that sometimes the people who are like, well, I'm only applying to Stanford because it's the only school that, is worth my time. And I'm totally getting in because I'm wonderful and look at my amazing GMAT score. I find that those people, rightfully and thankfully so, tend to not do as well. Good job, guys. You sussed them out. But to answer the other part of your question of like in terms of, so I think we all encourage people who have those great diamond in the rough stories. But I think we also tell people like, this is not what defines who you are as a person. Yeah. Getting into business school, like the fact that you're even thinking about improving yourself by going to business school, that shows that you have a certain level of maturity, of self-assessment, of self-awareness. And even those qualities alone, even if you never go to business school, the act of thinking through, like, what are my strengths and weaknesses? Where do I want to go in the world? How have I been effective in my life? That actually benefits you, even if you don't go to business school. And the fact that you're doing that means that you're going to be okay. I know this doesn't, I tell people, like, I know this doesn't, make the sting in this moment any worse. I acknowledge that this hurts. I acknowledge that it's painful to get rejected, but also like, you're going to be fine because you're amazing. And there's so many different paths to get to the top of that hill that you want to get to. So I think just reassuring them at the end, should the result not be what they were hoping for, that this is just one of several paths that you can take.
1,000%. We get told no so many times that it's easy to like stop ourselves from trying or putting ourselves out there or being vulnerable. And so, thank you for encouraging folks out there and helping reframe some of the conversation about what's possible. And, how do we think about what are our goals? How do we define them? Can we create action plans and alternatives such that we're able to like make incremental progress there? It's a really cool part of this process. Once you're able to step away from the anxiety of like having to fill it out, an application out, or we're having to worry about the outcome, I do find that folks who take a little bit of time to engage, I know Stanford questions, what matters most to you and why? Why Stanford? Kind of what are your goals, right? What are the things that you care about? Being able to take a little bit of a step back from the utility of the application to sit with the process and reflection. There's a lot of like really cool insights that you can draw out of it, even if you never apply. So
100%.
Can I ask you about the essays? I think I've said on this podcast before that I think the structure of Stanford's essays are among the best. I think it's deceptively simple. But the two parts ask a different thing. And I think also importantly, it's difficult to copy paste from your other applications in there. And you guys can probably tell when someone has just done a search replace for Wharton to Stanford or something.
And then they forget. And they didn't catch all of the search replaces. I see you.
Yeah, good luck with Wharton, since that's where you want to go, right? But the second one, I think, is at least in dealing with clients where they consistently make the same mistake, which is to write a brochure for Stanford. So it's like, why Stanford's like, let me tell you all the great things about it. I'm sure you know all the great things about the school. So how would you advise someone when they're putting that together to make it so that it answers the question, but it is not just a list of 19 clubs and activities that they want to join?
Yeah. And so, and I joked about like, I see you when you don't finish the search and replace. It's okay. I've seen it. I've still admitted those people. So like, I will never admit or deny someone solely because of their essays. I am not saying, is this a good essay? Is this a bad essay? Because we also recognize that everybody's coming in a different place in life. For some people, they might have had a long-term reflective practice. So they're able to like dig into some of these layers pretty easily. Whereas for some folks, this might be the very first time that you've engaged with, oh, what do I want? Or like, what is important to me beyond kind of having to moving through the world or kind of understanding kind of what's expected of you versus what do you want, right? Those are two different things. And so for folks who might be engaging in this for the first time, I also want you to give yourself grace in this. Nothing is perfect. This is an ongoing iterative practice, and you'll continue to ask yourself what matters over the course of your life. So just wanted to put a little bit of kind of ease there. And to come back to like the practical tip, don't write for us. Like, don't write for me, don't write for Stanford, write for you. And if you are kind of in this process thinking, hey, here's these things at Stanford, like, why is that important to me? Like, oh, this is how kind of I want to engage with it, or how it'll help me in the process. That'll help you, actually it'll help me help you later on down the line when I'm connecting you with people in the community before you even have to decide whether you want to come to Stanford or not. Or our career management center, that's going to advance those conversations that much more quickly, and it'll help you sort through and prioritize your time. Any kind of business school community, because there's going to be so many opportunities and so many cool, shiny things, being able to identify which shiny things you want, or like what type of shiny is the thing that you want to like follow, even that practice will help you kind of long term. So do it for you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, Will, we have covered so much. This has been so valuable. I think
Yeah, sorry, I could talk all day about this. I'm like an admissions nerd. Like, this is my jam. I love talking about it. I love supporting others. And so like, thank you for like providing a platform for me to kind of tap into the thing that that gives me joy.
You're hanging out with fellow admissions nerds. Like, trust, we get it. Trust us. But yeah, I think those are most of the high level questions. I think one of the things I just wanted to take away, and that I wanted our listeners to take away, is just this idea of like, there is no one Stanford person. Like, don't worry about like, my GMAT score isn't high enough, or I don't work for that fancy company, or I don't have the GPA. You know, you mentioned a second ago, people who have worked 2 or 3 jobs in college. I think of all of the things that go on that profile, the class profile. The GPA is the one that I like. Oh, if I could wave a magic wand, I would get rid of that one immediately, because like, there is a big difference between someone who majors in neuroscience engineering at MIT while working 3 jobs versus someone like the GPA. It's so hard to make it an apples to apples thing, unlike a standardized test. So I hear when people are like, oh, but my GPA is low. I'm like, yeah, but you were taking care of your sick brother, and you also majored in something that is really hard. So don't worry, you're fine, you know? So I basically thank you, because one of the big things I wanted to get out of this was to just let people not stress about some of the things that I think they commonly stress about that they shouldn't stress about. So thank you so much for dispelling a lot of those misconceptions.
Yeah, thank you. So if I can leave folks with 3 things. One is, it all starts with you. The next is, if it's important to you, it's important to us. And the final thing is, I believe in you and you can do this.
That's a great way to end. Thank you very much, Will.
Thank you.
So on GMAT Club, we're going to try something new. We're going to do some application assessments / commentary / roasts. We won't be too cruel. But we'll give our thoughts on applications and what we think are strengths, weaknesses, things that as they flesh out their application, they might want to think about or work on or emphasize or account for, or whatever verb you want to throw in there. So today we're going to look at 2 different applications. I wanted to do 2 because I think they're complementary in some ways and allow us to think about, and this connects to the conversation we just had, that there's lots of different ways to get into business schools, and these are applicants who bring different strengths. Candidate 1 has stellar academics, an exceptional GRE score, 334, strong GPA across their degrees. They have done PhD work where they got a 3.83. They have a master's degree where they got roughly the same GPA. Their GMAT is expired, but it's still at the 98th percentile. And their GRE score is recent and usable. They have degrees in material science and chemical engineering with deep specialization. They've had publications. They've worked in labs, 130 citations. They have a patent pending. This is clearly someone whose technical acumen and their capacity to do high-level quantitative work is really beyond question. Their core challenge is that they have a little bit less in terms of their leadership and interpersonal. They did co-found and lead the UT Austin Materials Research Society while they were in graduate school. And that built partnerships with major tech firms. That does add some credibility to their leadership claims. If I'm working with them, I'd certainly want to know more about that. Their relevant work. They worked at Lamb Research as an independent consultant. Again, that's something that I would want to know more about, because that would likely provide the grounds for at least an essay or some additional investigation on their part. They have a clear career vision. Their goal is to lead a hardware-focused VC or a commercial lab, and this aligns with their technical and entrepreneurial narrative. And so their core positioning as an applicant is maybe clearer in that way. As we think about this, the first thing that came to mind when I was looking at this is that here we have an applicant that has a clear strength, which is their technical acumen, and they have worked in the business world, right? But one of the things that I thought about as a question, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, is kind of a strategic question for an applicant, is when you have a real area of strength, how do you balance, or how do you think about your application so that you make sure that you emphasize and feature that strength, but at the same time, you either talk about or address things that might be weaknesses in the application? And there are some things that are, if not full-on weaknesses, are maybe less strong areas of this person's application with respect to what you might think of as like the soft skills, like leadership, interpersonal, etc. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things to think about is that when we put ourselves in the shoes of the admissions office, we need to think about, like, what are they looking for? If you almost think of it as a job application, what's the job that they're hiring me for? Is the job that they want a material science semiconductor engineer? Is that what I need to prove to them, that I'm very, very good at the science? Or are they hiring me for the role of future student in their community, and then beyond that, alumnus or alumna, and part of the ongoing community of their alumni, community, and that group of people, and the accomplishments that they are hoping I will go on to achieve, usually in the business world, or if not in the for-profit business world per se, in some sort of organization, whether it's a nonprofit or perhaps even a government organization. They're looking at, like, who is this person going to be in 20 years? And what are those interpersonal skills? Because research everywhere shows that the technical and IQ, intellectual strengths, those are great, but that's not actually what separates the people who really advance and make an impact in their future industries. And so I think that what this candidate should do, absolutely agree with you. Like, the academics this person doesn't even need to worry about the academics. Like, that is fine. The sort of trap that I think a candidate like this might make or might fall into, understandably, is that they think, I need to prove what a great engineer I am. So let me talk about the 15 research papers that I did, and this Nobel Prize winning whatever, work that I did at some lab. That's not the job they're hiring you for. I'm not hiring you to design a materials chip, whatever it is that I'm doing at Lamb. Like, I'm hiring you to be a future business alumnus or alumna. And so what I would advise this candidate to do is, when they're thinking about approaching their application, to really not downplay the technical side of it, but just not give it prominence. And instead, what I want to know, or how I'm going to separate the PhD student who does have the potential to go on to become an amazing venture capitalist, from the PhD student who is a technical genius, but really should just stay in a lab by themselves and not really interact with others. Both of these people are very valuable to society, but just one of them's a better fit for business school versus the other. So I would have this person really emphasize the leadership and the interpersonal skills that they have had a chance to develop, primarily through, first of all, some of their internships that they've had in venture capital. So they said that they worked as a venture partner, as a PhD fellow for a venture capital firm. I would love to know more about that. If they had experience maybe convincing the other people in the venture capital fund to make an investment or not make an investment, right? Were they able to influence those other people? Or, for example, as the president of the UT Austin Materials Research Society, what was that like from an interpersonal Like, was it easy to get people to join, or was it not easy to get people to join? And if they weren't joining at first, what were their objections and how did you overcome those objections? So those elements, the building of the university industry partnerships is also very important. So I would highlight those experiences in my application and not so much the technical consulting. I've got a patent pending. That stuff is lovely, but that's not quite what this audience is looking for, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would add a couple of things. The first is building on what you said. The academic stuff is almost like a cup that you can fill, and you don't need to overfill it. There's no additional benefit to that. And so, an application is a packet. And so when the reader is looking at it, they will know that you have those grades. And certainly you wouldn't want to do something like in your personal statement, say, well, I got a 3.83. It's like, no, like that box has been checked. Okay. And then again, what I would do if I was sitting down with this person is I would interrogate them. That sounds harsher than I intended, but I would ask them questions and ask them to tell me stories about all the interpersonal and entrepreneurial stuff that they did. Because there's not really a story to tell usually about a great GPA. That's just a fact that will certainly help you. But it doesn't really need to go much farther than that. And so you have, checked the heck out of that box. And so you can then move forward to building out the rest of your application in a way that demonstrates the full range of your strengths. And so your framing of it, I think, is the perfect one, which is that this is not an engineering PhD program. So don't try to impress people on that level. You need to focus on the thing that they want to know about and that they're curious about. And you want to make sure that you fill out your application in that way. And so whatever stories you choose to tell or the things that you elect to emphasize, they do need to make sure that they move beyond showing that you're, a technical wonk or something like that, that your deep specialization is evident from, your transcripts, from your CV. Everything else in your application needs to build on that and expand out.
It's funny, the different metaphors that we use. You use the academic, like a cup that's full, and once it's full, you can't fill it anymore. I use the metaphor. It's the exact same idea, but the metaphor that I use is a hurdle to cross. And it doesn't matter when you're watching someone in a race where they're jumping over hurdles. Like, it doesn't matter if they clear that hurdle by a millimeter or if they clear it, like they jump like 20 feet above it. You just need to clear the hurdle. You just need to convince me that, like, you're not going to flounder or be miserable in the rigorous academic setting of my school. And then after that, we move on to like so many other far more important things. So the hardest one is when you're trying to jump over a hurdle holding a cup that's full of water. Now that's the impressive. That person's getting in 100%.
I feel like that's a game for the fraternity Olympics or something like that.
That's
what
right.
exactly is in the cup?
It's good games.
Yeah. Well, more high stakes.
Yeah, just a little.
All right. So applicant 2, though, is now someone who comes at business school with a little bit different set of strengths and challenges. And so they have a 3.47 GPA, which is, I would put in the good but average bucket, right? And you can maybe comment on this, that there's kind of this range of GPAs where, if it's a 2.4, you clearly have some explanation to do probably in your personal statement to frame and make people understand the how and why of some initial struggle 15 years ago in school or something like that. 3.47, I don't think necessarily rises to that level, but there's still maybe a story that you want to tell about having an average GPA. What the strengths of this candidate are: they had significant leadership in college, so multiple high impact roles in student government. And so it's clear that the things that maybe the business world, and by extension, a business program, would care about, interpersonal and leadership, is more of a strength. How would you think about this person's application and how you would maybe advise them as they put together their portfolios?
Yeah, so I think, they expressed some concern about the GPA, and I agree with you. I don't think it's like a terrible GPA, but I don't know that they should flat out say, here's why my GPA isn't good. But I do think that they might want to consider writing in an optional essay just an explanation of, okay, when I was in college, I was going to class, but I was really getting pulled in a lot of different directions. I had this role in student government. And one of the things that I actually liked the most from their undergraduate was that for their fraternity, they helped acquire a new house for the fraternity. So almost like a real estate transaction. You see a lot of people who do fraternity and sorority stuff, and that's great. But I was like, this is a pretty unique way to impact your fraternity brothers, is helping them, acquire a new house, a new home for themselves. So I thought that was kind of cool. I do think though, the 3.5, it is a finance major, which is rigorous, but not neuroscience, electrical engineering type rigor. And they did say that they went to a large non-target state school. So ideally that would have been a little bit higher, but I do think that with a average to above average test score, I think that would immediately erase any concerns that anyone would have about the academics. Also, look, they're working at Amazon, I believe. So Amazon in a rotational program. So Amazon is not known for being a touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy corporate place to work, right? It's sort of up or out there. And so the fact that this person has successfully completed their time at Amazon makes me even less concerned about the academic profile. Reading this profile, the one thing that jumped out at me was the career goal of I want to work in the long term in a major multimedia firm. And I didn't see a lot of indication that they had previous experience in media. And media is one of those industries, like a lot of industries, where there's so many nuances and industry-specific things. Media was in a previous version of my life, that was the industry that I worked in. And, it sounds great when you're on the outside, like a lot of these glamorous, shiny industries. But then once you get into it, you're like, wow, it's really hard to make money. And all of these movies lose a lot of money. This is very stressful. So I think, I would love to get your take on what you thought about the goal of working in media.
Yeah, so that's the part that I circled in red. And it's part of a bigger question about how you handle pivots in people's careers. It's tricky because a lot of people will use the MBA to not just move up, but to sort of bounce towards the next thing that they want to do in their life, which isn't always exactly the same field. But there's still a bunch of why questions, and so if they were sitting down with me, I would almost be like that annoying toddler who just keeps asking why. I want to get to the bottom of it. And I also want to know what skills and experiences they've had, if there's nothing that's precisely on point that they feel is transferable, and why. The big fear is that they're going to come across as someone who's either just searching, or maybe a dilettante, or not. They don't know what they're getting into. And that's the danger. And so you have to make it so the more specific that they can be about what exactly they want to do, at least in their conversations with me, so we can then say, okay, I want you to take me through what you think that looks like. What are you doing now? What have you done before that informs how you think about this and why you think you would succeed? Because it's pretty tough if everything is just in one lane and then you want business school to send you on a completely different path. Because honestly, it seems like, just kind of speculating, a lot of times what happens with these things, probably not with this particular case since it's media, but a lot of times it is, well, I think that this business school is great for people who do whatever, and therefore I'm going to say that this is the thing that I want to do. And so I need to know what about that experience, or what about your experience prepares you for this, and also the why behind what this career change is.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely with that. Like focusing on the transferable skills, and show me that you've done homework. I like that you use the word dilettante. That's the more diplomatic version of the word that I use, which is flaky. Like sometimes people just seem really flaky. Like, oh, this sounds like a cool place to work. I'm just going to go after that. And then they haven't actually thought through the reality. I see this a lot with media. I see this a lot with nonprofits, where people who are like, I've been working 100 hours a week in private equity, and I want to save my soul and go work because working for a nonprofit sounds so stress-free. And I'm like, whoa.
It is not that.
One of the most stressful jobs I ever had was a summer internship that I had at a nonprofit. So like, whoa, prove to me that you know what you're getting into. I think that this candidate, if they want to stick with the media story, they would benefit tremendously from a little bit of homework, a little bit of evidence of finding someone else who maybe had a similar role to them at Amazon. Or maybe, Amazon themselves, they have an entertainment division, the Amazon Studios and the Prime Video. Like find a colleague in that division who's willing to talk to you, who will then say something like, yeah, actually, I think that with the MBA, you would totally be able to make the switch. And then you can then reference that person in your essay, for example. You can say, well, I spoke to the head of recruiting at Amazon Studios, and they said that after I get that, they believe that the MBA will allow me to make this pivot. Great. Now the burden of proof, you've sort of lifted it, and I don't need to worry about like, well, what if they don't get this job? Are they going to be unhappy? Like all of these questions are suddenly erased because now I know that you've done the homework necessary about regarding the feasibility of this career path.
One of the harder questions, and or the hardest conversations, and I don't have it as much as I used to because I think people are a little bit more informed about where they need to be in their life to pursue an MBA, is the "you're not quite ready" conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be, 10, 12 years ago, I sound like a grandpa, but 10, 12 years ago, you would get the 23-year-old who wants to apply or something. And you're like, look, man, the pancake's not baked yet. Don't flip it. And so this might be a case where you say, if you're at Amazon, then maybe even in addition to talking to people who are in the entertainment side of Amazon, you might also explore positions there, right? Anything that shows that you have even like a tiny toe in that realm, so that it seems like that's a direction that you're moving and that you're not just doing a quick 90-degree cut to something else because you're kind of burned out where you are. I had one other question here. And this is interesting because of our conversation that we just had with Will, where he said, if it's important to you, it's important to us. There's this bit here about this is being an active musician and producer in a home studio. Mm-hmm. And so this clearly shows that someone is creative. But a lot of times with something like this, what you'll get from an applicant or in our world, a client is like, well, it's not really relevant, right? How do you deal with something like this that is, I don't know what the metaphor you want to use. It's like a nice garnish, or it's depending on how serious they are about it, right? How does that play into their application? How should they think about like these things that are maybe important hobbies in their life that demonstrate a passion, but is either not directly relevant? I guess here, since, media vaguely is the area they want to go into, this could be. But do you have thoughts on the bits of personal flair that people want to throw in their applications?
Yes. I think so it's interesting. The music, you might say like, well, they do music, they have their own music studio in their home, and therefore it ties in with the multimedia story. But one of the only businesses that's harder than the movie business is the music business, right? So like, maybe again, showing that you've done that homework and you actually know what you're getting into. Not that you can't make a terrific career for yourself in the music industry, but it's gonna be a hard journey. But so in general, I think for flair like this, like the music studio, like I like to make my own music, or whatever it might be. Talk about it, mention it in the resume, but I would not hit this very hard. I would like to see it maybe if you can think of a way that it benefits the campus community in some way. So if you just say, I want you to accept me because I produce music and that makes me cool, please let me in, I think that's a wasted opportunity. Versus conversely, if you say, look, I found that every year Wharton has this spring festival. I'm making this up, by the way. Nope. But I found that your school has a spring festival, and I would love to be the DJ for that festival. Something like that, where at least it's like, okay, I have this skill or this fun hobby, and here's how I can bring it to the community, to the benefit of my classmates. Then, I think then you could mention it. But even then, I would certainly not make it, for Wharton's second essay, which is essentially asking, how are you going to help our community? I would not make a hobby like this, like 80% of your word count.
Classmates need fresh beats, right?
Everyone does. Yes.
The advice that I was given when I was in school was things like this are the last line of the CV. It was like the extras or whatever. And the way to think about it is put things in there that you would love to talk about in an interview. Because a lot of times, probably more so in the professional world than in academic admissions, like someone just sits down with your resume and it's really the first time that they're really going over, and they'll just look at the bottom and it's like, oh. And so my thing was that I do quilting with my mom. And that was a thing that like 100% of the times people would ask me about. And for someone who is 6'5" and enormous and does not look like a quilter, it was always something that always humanized me. And so they were always vaguely touched by it. And I think it made me seem more human. And so that's better than saying that I'm like Excel certified or something like that.
Oh gosh, yeah, no. That's such a charming thing to know about you, Brian. I'm charming. I'm charmed by that.
It works.
If I were interviewing, it really does. That's really effective. But it's interesting. One of the things that you just touched upon as a side note that I think makes it particularly effective is that if you really are 6'5", which is funny because here we are on the internet, so you can't really tell that you are roughly 1.5 feet taller than I am. But on the internet, everyone's the same height. But I think one of the things that makes it's charming on its own, but it's especially charming because it's a little bit unexpected. And so sometimes people have a hobby where, let's say they're a computer coder and they're like, well, my hobby is playing computer games. And so I'm like, yeah, right. Or my hobby is reading books about coding. Or there was one time I worked with a guy who was like, I work at the World Bank and my hobbies are reading The Economist. And I'm like, ooh, like, first of all, that's kind of a boring hobby, but like, it's also expected. Like if the professional quilter is like, I read The Economist, I'm like, how did you get into that? But the Economist reading The Economist is a little bit kind of like, okay, we get it. You like economics. Cool, check. So that's the other sort of, I think, sort of litmus test that I would use is if your hobby is in some way very obvious or related to what you do. If you work in real estate, whatever, and you're like, I like watching renovation shows. Okay, well, that's more, you can still put it, but just realize that the impact is going to be a lot less because it's sort of expected.
Yeah. My 50,000 foot view of these two applicants would just be that for the second applicant, I think that how they do on the standardized test would end up being hugely important, because for everybody, they have different levels of importance depending on what you bring to the table and maybe what people perceive your weaknesses are. And so with this applicant, you would emphasize that where you apply will be more determined by how well you do. And if they struggle on it, that plus the GPA might put more of a ceiling on it. But taking a step back from that, it's also the case that you could imagine both of these applicants doing very well in the same rough sets of schools, which builds on, again, our conversation that we had with Will Torres from Stanford, which is that there are a lot of paths and there's not a single, archetype or pattern that one has to fit in order to get into the MBA program that one wants.
Absolutely agreed. So good luck to both of our candidates. And yeah, good luck to you if you're out here watching this. And hopefully you can apply what we've said to your own candidacy.
Yeah. And I think that probably wraps us up for today. We're almost exactly at an hour. I would love to thank Will Torres again from Stanford University, Graduate School of Business, and his new title is Global Admissions Director. Is that what it is? I might have fumbled that. But once again, this is GMAT Club Podcast. I'm Brian Fobi with GuruFi.com and Maria Wich-Vila from ApplicantLab.com. Thank you for joining us on GMAT Club Podcast. We'll be back with you again soon for episode number 4.